This is one of those Sundays where my voice does not want to cooperate, so hopefully that's not a distraction. This morning, my intention is to wrap up the book of Judges with chapters 19 through 21. And as you can see, the title is The Trouble with Tribalism. And I want to tie in, as we oftentimes try to do, with contemporary thoughts and events. And this is a quotation from a Politico article about the experiences that we see on a regular, or have on a regular basis, it seems like these days, with politics and the divisiveness of it. Have modern politics become irredeemably tribal? In September, Thomas Friedman decried the virus of tribalism infecting the United States and other democracies. Politics in the U.S. continues to feel increasingly tribal and divisive, noted CNN's Christian Amanpour in 2018. If there's one thing pundits have agreed on over the last few years, particularly in the Trump era, it's that tribalism in politics is on the rise, and that's a problem. Or maybe it's not that new, and the underlying problem lies inside us. For my recent book, I spent months in conversation with a handful of thinkers who wrestle with the big questions driving populist politics today. One of them was Jonathan Haidt, whose 2013 book, Righteous Mind, Why Good People Are Divided by Politics and Religion, which I'm currently listening to, astutely presaged, or presaged, however you pronounce that, the current conversation about tribal politics. He puts the blame not at the feet of Facebook or either party, but on humans' basic need to define teams and camps and belong to one of them. Throughout the history of the world, key point, elaborate hero versus villain narratives have regularly been spun to glorify one political camp and demonize another. Who's in charge never really matters. Haidt, a social psychologist, suggested in his book and still believes this inclination might have an evolutionary background. Clans and villages that were bad at cooperating were often conquered by their less divided neighbors. This might have wired us to appreciate tribal kinship. It also may have wired us to prefer defending our reputations rather than defending the truth. Another aspect of politics that infuriates journalists and pundits but appears to be built into the system. Haidt reveals in his book that his eureka moment in this respect occurred when his wife asked why he had failed to do the dishes. Only afterwards did he grasp that his mind automatically invented an elaborate and false defense story that even he believed at first. Now, evolution aside, I would say that there are particular things in this writing that are enumerated that are going to line up with our topic this morning. So again, as we say, politics is not the point. That's just a lead-in, okay? And as he said, clans and villages that were bad at cooperating were often conquered by their less divided neighbors, which you would find to be the case, it seems, in the book of Judges. And somewhere in here, I just read past it. Where does he say it? Throughout the history of the world, bottom of the second paragraph, elaborate hero versus villain narratives have regularly been spun to glorify one political camp and demonize another. Who's in charge never really matters. Judges 21:2. And the people came to the house of God. Now, mind you, the time frame, basically, as the refrain says over and over, there was no king in Israel. Who's in charge, they said, never really matters. Well, in this case, nobody's in charge. Off and on, it tends to be the case that there were judges, but here in this particular era that we're looking at, that's not the case. And the people came to the house of God and abode there till even before God, and lifted up their voices and wept sore, and said, O Lord God of Israel, why is this come to pass in Israel, that there should be today one tribe lacking in Israel? And the children of Israel repented them before Benjamin their brother, and said, there is one tribe cut off from Israel this day. And the people repented them for Benjamin, because that the Lord had made a breach in the tribes of Israel. This is very, very sad. You're talking about the near extinction of an entire collection of people that are supposed to be your brethren. Who knows what the term conflagration means? You can raise your hand. Ethan says yes. Somebody says, stop using big words. Well, sometimes I like to do that. We can expand our vocabulary. Here's what it means. If you can just remember flames, conflagration, flames, an extensive fire which destroys a great deal of land or property. Now, don't let me lose you on this. I'm going to connect it back to what we just looked at. An extensive fire which destroys a large area. Now, as we all know, here's the concept biblically illustrated of a conflagration. And the tongue is a fire, a world of iniquity. So is the tongue among our members that defiles the whole body and sets on fire the course of nature and is set on fire of hell. So that's a conflagration biblically illustrated. Now, how does that tie into tribalism? What's the point? James goes on, or he precedes what we just read with this observation. Even so, the tongue is a little member and boasts great things. Behold, notice the contrast, how great a matter a little fire kindles. Now, normally we would focus on the fact that the tongue can cause a lot of problems, but here's my point this morning. The principle behind James 3:5 is this: unexpected effects that stem from a cause that is disproportionate to the effect. Let me read that again. Unexpected effects that are disproportionate to the cause. Back to James 3:5. A little fire kindles a great matter. Judges 19:1. And it came to pass, again, in those days when there was no king in Israel, that there was a certain Levite sojourning on the side of Mount Ephraim, who took to him a concubine out of Bethlehem, Judah. Now again, the tie-in to previous lessons. There's no king in Israel. In other words, what we just read from the political divisiveness commentary that we just read at the front end, it doesn't really matter who's in charge, but we're saying in this case, nobody's in charge. There's no unifying authority. Now, as we oftentimes do, we think on behalf of our audience for the sake of discussion. Somebody would say, yes, there was. God was in charge. How can you say there's no unifying authority? Well, let's be fair here. We're trying to deal with the reality of the record the way that it was written, and here is what the recorder says. Judges 17:6. In those days there was no king in Israel. What's the result? Every man did that which was right in his own eyes. Judges 18:1. In those days there was no king in Israel. In those days the tribe of the Danites sought them an inheritance to dwell in. And if you recall from last week, we discussed that in very, I don't want to say excruciating detail, but we discussed it in detail. What's the result? No unifying authority, and basically everybody decides we're going to try to form our own order, as we discussed from last week. Now, side note, when you get to Judges 17 through the end of the book, after you've already read the previous 16 chapters, there may be a temptation to say, where are these random stories coming from? This just seems to be bolted on to the end of the book. And you may also say, boy, times are really dark later on in the Judges, but that's not actually what's happening, and we'll get to that in just a moment. But you may say to yourself, just all of a sudden we have this story about Levites that are traveling different places, and you have in particular in Judges 19, you have a Levite who has taken a woman as his concubine, and he has to go back and retrieve her, and you're saying, this just kind of seems like it's out of nowhere. Where does it fit in the narrative? But they do give a slice of daily existence, what it's like to live in a disunited nation, Judges 19:2. And his concubine played the whore against him and went away from him under her father's house to Bethlehem, Judah, and was there 4 whole months. And her husband arose and went after her. And when the man arose to depart, he and his concubine and his servant, and when they were come by Jebus, the day was far spent, and the servant said unto his master, Come, I pray thee, let us turn into this city of the Jebusites and lodge in it. And his master said unto him, We will not turn aside hither into a city of a stranger that is not of the children of Israel. Now already you've got tribalism being practiced. So this Levite, who is from Ephraim, with his servant, who is chasing his concubine down, says to his servant, who says, let's turn aside to Jebus and rest. And he says, nope, they're not part of our tribe. It's too risky. We will pass over to Gibeah. And he said to his servant, come and let us draw near to one of these places and lodge all night in Gibeah or in Ramah. And if you're not up on your biblical geography, Gibeah is in Benjamin, and we'll get to that in just a second. So, we're working on the idea of tribalism. Now we're going to roll in a conflagration that results from tribalism. And we've already said, from a little matter, a great fire can be kindled. Now let's tie all this together. And behold, there came an old man from his work out of the field, which was also of Mount Ephraim. Now, stick with me here. You got a Levite who is from Ephraim. He has traveled back down to Bethlehem, Judah, to bring his concubine back with him. And while he is traveling through the intervening territory, while he's in Benjamin, he runs across another individual who is from the same place that he is. And he sojourned in Gibeah, but the men of the place were Benjamites. So you've got a Levite, an older man from the tribe of Ephraim. They're both in the tribe of Benjamin's territory. And when he had lifted up his eyes, he saw a wayfaring man in the street of the city. And the old man said to the Levite who was traveling, yet there is both straw and provender for our asses, and there is bread and wine also for me, and for your handmaid, and for the young man which is with thy servants. There is no want of anything. And the old man said, peace be with thee. Howsoever, let all thy wants lie upon me, and lodge not in the street. So, in case I butchered that, here's the summary. You've got three wayfaring men, at least, a Levite who is looking for his concubine, another man who is from Ephraim, and the Levite's servant, and also his concubine that is with him, as they're trying to travel back to their home. Three wayfaring men and a woman from Ephraim/Bethlehem, and they're sojourning for the time being in the land of Benjamin, and all they basically have is each other. Nobody in Benjamin cares for them. They're in a tribal territory that belongs to their nation, but they can't find anybody from that tribe that cares about what's going on with them. Now, somebody would say this: they made a calculated decision not to go to a strange territory in Jebus, but instead turn into a place where at least their brethren of their nation would reside. And a reasonable person would say, you know, I kind of don't blame them. You tend to want to stick with your people, right? Because that's what's safe. That makes sense, doesn't it? But then suddenly, what seems like just an isolated random story that we can't figure out, why is this being bolted on, we think, to the end of the book? What seems like an isolated story turns into this: from wayfare to warfare. Now here's where the illustration about a conflagration comes in. Disproportionate, the inputs are disproportionate to the output. What seems to be an isolated story, and then it turns into something totally out of control. Then all the children of Israel, Judges 20 verse 1, went out, and the congregation was gathered together as one man from Dan to Beersheba. That's from the northern and southern extremes. Everybody came out with the land of Gilead unto the Lord in Mizpah. So all the men of Israel were gathered together against the city, knit together as one man. And the tribes of Israel sent men through all the tribe of Benjamin, saying, what wickedness is this that is done among you? Now therefore deliver us the men, the children of Belial, which are in Gibeah, that we may put them to death, and put away evil from Israel. But the children of Benjamin would not hearken, tribalism, to the voice of their brethren, the children of Israel. But the children of Benjamin gathered themselves together out of the cities unto Gibeah to go out to battle against the children of Israel. Now, side point. No king whatsoever, and yet you have this particular instance unifying most of the nation. And you would say, well, this is a good thing. They're about to fix the problem. Well, you can look at that in another way and say, this is terrible. No king whatsoever, disunity and disorder everywhere, and the only thing that can bring you together is when an isolated incident suddenly escalates almost, it seems like immediately, into sudden out-and-out warfare. And that's what it takes to unify everybody? Now, You just translate that onto our political environment. And again, this lesson is not about politics. I'm just saying, you just think about how quickly things can spiral out of control when there's already pre-existing tribal pressure, and all it takes is a spark. Now, as we go through, we're going to parlay that into church politics. So stick with me. Are we all together still? This is a lot. How? Here's the question. How did we get to this point? You go from one man traveling across territories, staying with what he thinks are his brethren, to reclaim his concubine. Somebody says, well, concubines, let's talk about that for a minute. No, that's not the point this morning. We'll deal with that. That's a totally different lesson. Don't worry about that for now. You have a man who is going to retrieve his concubine, and all of a sudden you go from that to this. You have the entire nation coming out against Gibeah and Benjamin. What happened here? How did one man trying to repair his relationship with a concubine result in a referendum on open warfare? And somebody says, you're using big words again. What's a referendum? And the chief of all the people, even of all the tribes of Israel, presented themselves in the assembly of the people of God. A referendum is basically when you defer to the people in their entirety to make a decision. That's what's happening here. They're coming together as a congregation, and this is what it takes to unite them apparently, and they're saying, we got to figure out what to do here. 400,000 footmen that drew sword. We were on the National Mall 2 weeks ago in apparently what is one of the busiest days in D.C. And let me tell you, I'm just saying conservatively, at least 250,000 people. You say, no, that's not possible. I'm telling you, a 2-mile stretch of land that was packed to the gills with people. You couldn't hardly walk. And I'm saying there had to have been 250,000 people there, and this is almost double that. I can't possibly conceive of that, and these are footmen that drew sword. You talk about serious business. I would be scared. Give here, behold, you are all the children of Israel, verse 7. Give here your advice and counsel. What are we going to do? This is out of hand. And all the people arose as one man, saying, we will not any of us go to his tent, neither will we any of us turn into his house. And you just think about brethren. You can't get them united for nothing until there's some division in the church. And sometimes it seems like they don't even care about that, do they? That's sad. It's gotten so out of hand, we are now forced to take extreme action. And all of this seems like it's stemming from tribalism. Judges 20, verse 23. And the children of Israel went up and wept before the Lord until even, and asked counsel of the Lord, saying, even with all of their determination and their, what would you call it, their resolve, the resolute nature of the mindset, this is terrible and we got to do something. Even with all of that vehement demeanor, they're still saying and weeping and saying, God, we've got to ask you again. We got to be sure about this. Saying, have we gotten to this point? They're saying, shall I go up to battle against the children of Benjamin, my brother? And the Lord said, go up against him. I'm not going to stand in the way. Now somebody would say, well, that serves them right. It could be the case here that God is letting both sides be punished. We'll get to that in just a minute. And here's the sad irony of it. Back up to chapter 19. How did we get to this point? One man, a singular story, just seemingly random, traveling across territories to get his concubine back, and then you go from that to the entire country is united against a singular tribe in open warfare. And when they were by Jebus, the day was far spent, and the servant said unto his master, you say, we've already read this, it's good to repeat it. The servant said unto his master, come, I pray thee, and let us turn into the city of the Jebusites and lodge in it. You say, well, that's the Jebusites. Why would they go there? And his master said unto him, we will not turn aside hither unto the city of a stranger that is not of the children of Israel. This Levite did all this to avoid a strange tribe, the Jebusites. And you say, who can blame him? But what does it get him? He's honoring tribalism here, saying, well, the tribe, the land, the country, the inhabitants, the Jebusites that are in Jerusalem, I'm not going to them. They're one of the 7 wicked nations, or a cohort of those nations, the Canaanites. We can't have anything to do with them. So he goes over to his brethren. And what does it get him? And the Levite, the husband of the woman that was slain, answered and said, so the congregation is gathered together, and they're asking, tell us what happened. And the Levite, who went to bring back his concubine, said, I came to Gibeah that belongs to a tribe of my nation, Benjamin, I and my concubine to lodge. And the men of Gibeah rose against me, and beset the house round about upon me by night, and thought to have slain me. And my concubine have they forced that she is dead. And he's not even telling the whole story. The first part of it is they wanted him and his servant. And I took my concubine and cut her into pieces. You say, well, he's just as heinous. She's dead. What do you make of that? He's trying to make can you say a political statement? Maybe not political, but he's trying to get people's attention. And I took her and cut her into pieces and sent her throughout all the country of the inheritance of Israel, for they have committed lewdness and folly in Israel. This was so bad that Gibeah gets an infamous name from it. And I think this is the connection. And Caleb has done more study on this than I have. I don't know if you've looked at this or not. We can talk about this afterwards if you think this is a different instance. But Hosea says this, they have deeply corrupted. This is what, would you say, generations later, the captivity, or on the precipice of the captivity? They, the children of Israel, at this point in time, have deeply corrupted themselves as back in the days of Gibeah. Therefore, he will remember their iniquity, he will visit their sins. It seems like the only name that Gibeah has gotten is out of infamy, an act so heinous that their name has now become tied to it, up to the captivity, generations later. Now, stick with me here, this is lengthy. We go from a singular, isolated incident to open warfare. What happened? Tribalism, disunity. And the men of Israel went out to battle against Benjamin. And the men of Israel put themselves in array to fight against them at Gibeah. And the children of Benjamin came forth out of Gibeah and destroyed down to the ground of the Israelites that day 22,000 men. Now, back up for a second. You remember that I said that we may read this and say, well, Benjamin had it coming. And then I said, maybe God is punishing everybody here. This is what happens. They lose, what does it say, 22,000 men? The rest of the Israelites against Benjamin? Verse 22. And the people, the men of Israel, encouraged themselves and set their battle again in array in the place where they put themselves in array the first day. And the children of Israel went up and wept before the Lord until even, and asked counsel of the Lord, saying, shall I go up again to battle against the children of Benjamin, my brother? And the Lord said, go up against him. It's almost like they're holding their breath, hoping that God will say, no, that's enough. It's like they're just hoping and praying, please let this be taken care of so we don't have to go through this anymore. And God says, no, not yet. Go back. And the children of Israel came near against the children of Benjamin the second day. And Benjamin went forth against them out of Gibeah the second day and destroyed down to the ground of the children of Israel again 18,000 men. All these drew the sword. Then all the children of Israel and all the people went up and came to the house of God. What is this, a third time? And wept and sat there before the Lord and fasted that day until even. You mean to tell me you're about to go back out to battle and now you're starving yourself? It's that bad? And offered burnt offerings and peace offerings before the Lord. And you have to wonder, is it possible they were this diligent before the conflagration that they're now saying, it's so bad, we're determining to offer burnt offerings and sacrifices at this place. Had they ever been so diligent in their life? Maybe, you can speculate. And the children of Israel inquired of the Lord, for the ark of the covenant of God was there in those days. Key point that we'll get to in just a moment. And Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron, stood before it in those days, saying, Shall I yet again go out to battle against the children of Benjamin, my brother, or shall I cease? Is this not enough? And the Lord said, Go up again, for tomorrow I will deliver them into thy hand. And the children of Israel went up against the children of Benjamin on the third day, and put themselves in array against Gibeah as at other times. And there came against Gibeah 10,000 chosen men out of Israel, and the battle was sore. Boy, how bad is it that now he says it's sore? We've already lost, what, about 40,000 people or more? And now you say it's sore? How bad was that? But they knew not that evil was near them. And the Lord smote Benjamin before Israel. And the children of Israel destroyed the Benjamites that day, 20 and 5,100 men. All these drew the sword. And there fell of Benjamin 18,000 men. All these were men of valor. And they turned and fled toward the wilderness under the rock of Rimmon, or Rimmon. And they gleaned of them in the highways 5,000 men, and pursued hard after them to guide them, or get them, and slew 2,000 men of them. So that all which fell that day of Benjamin were 20 and 5,000 men that drew the sword. All these were men of valor. So if I'm calculating here, one day was 25,000, then 8,000, then another day was another 25,000. You can correct me on that if I'm wrong. Regardless, whether it's 50,000 or roughly 30,000, that's a lot of people. 47. But 600 men are all that's left at this point, out of an entire tribe. 600 men turned and fled to the wilderness under the rock of Rimmon, and abode in the rock of Rimmon 4 months. And the men of Israel turned again to the children of Benjamin, and smote them with the edge of the sword, as well as men of every city, as the beast, and all that came to hand. Also they set on fire the cities that they came to. And the children of Israel repented them for Benjamin their brother, and said, There is one tribe cut off from Israel this day. Verse 15 of Judges 21. And the people repented them for Benjamin, because the Lord had made a breach in the tribes of Israel. Then the elders of the congregation said. And so I'm pausing on this particular verse, and we're trying to make application. You say, boy, this is a hard jump to make. Is this how it is with the elders in the church now? They let tribalism and partyism and cliques get so out of control that when they do finally decide to take care of an issue, it's almost too late. And so many people have left that we say, who's left now? Now, instead of dealing with ignorant behavior on the front end, it's festered to the point of the extinction of an entire segment of the assembly. Now, on the point of tribalism, I want to try to make a turn now, make application. Was that bad? A lot of people are in a tribe and they're there just because they inherited it. You were born into it, right? And you're a part of the tribe because that's what you're taught. This is our tribe, son or daughter. This is how we do things. And apparently that was the case in the time of the judges. They're supposed to be a unified nation, but they have this tribal mentality where they don't regard each other with any sense of justice or equality. Some people, a lot of people, they're in a tribe because they just inherited it. They didn't choose to be there, and that's just how they behave. But then you have some people who are in the tribe because they choose to be there. And those people, they bring more to the table than the people who just take it for granted. Now is when we introduce Ruth. And somebody said, what does Ruth got to do with this? Now you go back and watch Caleb's classes on Ruth, and you'll find out how this fits in. I'll gloss over some of this, but we don't have enough time. Ruth fits into the Judges. The book opens up and says that. Now how can people say, when they read the book, they just read right past that? in the days of the judges. Ruth is in the judges. You say, well, that doesn't mean it's in this particular time frame. I'll answer that in just a moment. And Ruth said, now what are we discussing here? Tribalism. A Levite traveling to retrieve his concubine, stays in Benjamin. They do him wrong. His concubine ends up dead, and then you have open warfare. All because he wouldn't stay with the Jebusites. You say, well, that wouldn't have been any better. Well, this definitely wasn't any better either. And these are supposed to be his people. Tribalism. Now here you have the story of Ruth. And Ruth said, entreat me not to leave thee, or to return from following after thee. For whether you go, I will go, and where you lodge, I will lodge. Thy people shall be my people, and thy God my God. And Caleb said this in his class. People like to attach romanticism to this, and I wouldn't say that's necessarily wrong, and this tends to be a popular verse that's quoted in weddings, but Caleb said this, there's a bigger point here than just the romance that's involved. It's fine if you get the romance piece out of it. It's nice stuff. But here's the bigger point. And Boaz said unto the elders, again, look, notice what we're doing here. Let's make the connection. Here you have a conflagration out of control, and finally the elders are getting together and saying, we got to address this after open warfare. We'll get to that in just a moment. Now you have Boaz approaching the elders and all the people who are gathered together. You are witnesses this day that I have bought all that was Elimelech's and all that was Chilion's and Mahlon's of the hand of Naomi. Moreover, Ruth the Moabitess. Now you say, Jebusites, Moabites. Both are about as bad as the other, and they did not get along with Moabites. Distant relatives, you could say, but they weren't getting along. And here's a lady from one of the worst, can you say, let's just say accommodatively, if it's not the worst, it's one of the worst tribes you can think of that's not of the tribe of the Israelites. Ruth the Moabitess, the wife of Mahlon, have I purchased to be my wife, to raise up the name of the dead upon his inheritance, that the name of the dead be not cut off from among his brethren. Again, the connection here. We're comparing stories together. There is one tribe cut off from Israel this day. A contrasting story. Here is Boaz saying, I have bought my family's inheritance and purchased Ruth, who is of a different nation altogether, to be my wife, so that we can continue to carry on the tribe's name, so they won't be cut off from among my brethren. From the gate of his place, you are witnesses this day. And all the people that were in the gate and the elders said, we are witnesses. The Lord make the woman that has come into thy house like Rachel and Leah. Boy, that is humongous. You're telling me that Israel is saying we are blessing a Moabite like Rachel and Leah. Who are Rachel and Leah? Which two did build the house of Israel. You can't get a higher compliment than that. And here's a woman who's not only is she not a tribe of Israel, of a totally different enemy nation. And they're saying, we regard this woman so much, she holds status like Rachel and Leah. And do thou worthily in Ephratah, and be famous in Bethlehem. Now, stick with me here, really quick point. For anyone who would say, what does this have to do, what does Ruth, in the book of Ruth, have to do with Judges 17 through 21? I know this is confusing. Look at the lower left corner. The two arrows that are red and the arrow that's blue. This is a chart that one of our brethren put together, and it seems pretty accurate to me based on what I've read. Judges 17 through 21 and the book of Ruth basically fall in the early years of the book of Judges, and Ruth can actually be either right beside Judges 19 through 21, the conflagration that we've looked at, or possibly even in the middle, if you want to look at it that way. So you have two stories, the conflagration we're calling it in Judges 19 through 21 and the book of Ruth, that possibly are side by side. What's the contrast? What a tie-in. Two similar problems. One is caused by tribalism, the conflagration, and the other is solved by leaving the tribe, Ruth. Now, I'm trying to make this not be a mess. Stick with me. Now, we've gone from Ruth, the Moabitess, who they are saying, we are regarding her as great as Rachel and Leah, the female founders of the nation. Now, let's go back to the conflagration again. Then the elders of the congregation said, now you had Boaz approaching the elders of the congregation, and he's saying, I bought this woman and all of my family's inheritance to make sure that our name isn't erased. How shall we do for the wives of them that remain, seeing the women are destroyed out of Benjamin? Here you have the near extinction of Benjamin, and the elders finally are saying, we've got to figure out how to keep their name from being erased. It's gotten so bad. And they said there must be an inheritance for them that escaped out of Benjamin. What's the connection? Here is Boaz saying, why is he taking Ruth, the Moabitess? He's extending himself beyond tribal boundaries to raise up the name of the dead upon this inheritance, that the name of the dead be not cut off from among them. Contrasting story. And they said there must be an inheritance for Benjamin that escaped out of Benjamin, that a tribe be not destroyed. Howbeit we may not give them wives of our daughters, for the children of Israel sworn, saying, cursed be he that gives a wife to Benjamin. Now this is a bit out of order, but it's for effect. So you have Benjamin, who has nearly been eradicated, and here's what happens just before that. And the congregation sent thither 12,000 men of the valiantest, and commanded them, go and smite the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead with the edge of the sword, and the women and the children. And they found among the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead, which is a different territory, 400 young virgins that had known no man by lying with any male. And they brought them unto the camp to Shiloh, which is in the land of Canaan. Now, is this making sense? I know this is a lot. One situation, Judges 19 through 21, seems to be caused by tribalism. And the other seems to be solved by going beyond a tribal mentality. Now, somebody says fairly, they say this, well, God is the one who separated them into tribes to begin with, right? But there's a difference to me as I'm going through this between being separated into territory for organization's sake, to keep things orderly, versus you have cultivated a tribal mentality. Well, our tribe is better. Our tribe is different. We do things different. And that, therefore, trumps the unity of the whole. You say God is the one who separated them into tribes, so you can't really impugn that idea. But I'm saying that, to me, was an organizational aspect. You got all of these people being moved en masse to a land that is riddled with heinous people. They've been given the task to clear it out, and it only seems fair to say we're dividing it up into territories by tribes, and it makes it more organizationally compact and orderly so that you can maintain peace. That's just what makes sense. And that's no different than the autonomy of local congregations in the New Testament, is it? You're dividing people up so that they can manage themselves better. Under the church of God, which is at Corinth, to them that are sanctified in Jesus Christ, Christ Jesus, called to be saints, with all that are in every place. Local congregations, I hesitate to call them tribes because that's not what they are, but for the sake of this lesson making application, we're saying local tribes of God's people versus the unified tribe of God's people in every place. For as the body is one and has many members, and so all the members of that body, being many, are one body. One body, many people, many locations, and guess what? The same problems centuries later. It has been declared unto me of you, my brethren, that those which are of the house of Chloe, one tribe, trying to do the right thing, that there are contentions. Let's just say, for the sake of effect and application, tribalism among you. Now this I say, that every one of you that says, I'm of Paul, Paul's tribe, I'm of Apollos, Apollos' tribe, I'm of Cephas, Peter's tribe, and I'm of Christ, Christ's tribe. Is Christ divided? Was Paul crucified for you? Or were you baptized in the name of Paul? I thank God that I baptized none of you but Crispus and Gaius. And I'm saying that's like the church today. 12-year-olds dunked with zero commitment. Why? Because they don't understand. It's not their fault. That's the adults' fault. That's the elders' fault. You're dunking these kids to make them a part of the tribe. They're inheriting it and don't know what they're inheriting. And then when they grow up, you have this. Church splits that happen along personality boundaries rather than principles. And as we say, and we've covered this multiple weeks in a row, there it is again, honoring preferences and people above principles. Do you see how that works out? Now, in some sense, I'm preaching to the choir here. But if this lesson goes out, it goes out. I'm saying that's tribalism. Dunking these little kids just so you can say we got another one added to the tribe. That's all you're getting is another member of the tribe. You're not getting committed, converted people. It's maybe with good intentions, but that's not what you're getting. Crossing tribal lines. Well, are you trying to say that lost people, that people outside of the body are saved? No, don't. We're not going that direction. You know I'm not saying that. We're saying getting rid of personality preferences and educating ourselves so that we can continue to be a unified whole. Matthew 1:5. And Salmon, however you want to pronounce it, begat Boaz of Rahab. And Boaz begat Obed of Ruth. And what did that lead to? Verse 6, or verse 5, Obed begat Jesse. Jesse begat David, the king. And David the king begat Solomon of her that had been wife of Uriah. And you move on down, and Jacob begat Joseph, the husband of Mary, of whom was born Jesus, who was called Christ. And some people would say, wait a minute, I'm just now realizing Jesus had Moabite lineage somewhere along the lines. Yes, he did. And Rahab was in there. And you have to wonder, I don't think this is the case, but I'm just saying mental exercises. Would Jesus be here if Ruth had not been brought in outside of the tribe and made a part of the tribe willingly? Now here's another kicker for you. As we talk about tribalism and not fostering that mentality, not dividing ourselves up into cliques and personality followers in the church. Well, my preacher, there is no such thing as my preacher. He's everybody's preacher. My evangelist, no such thing. The source idea for this lesson is this. Crossing tribal lines, the source idea was this. I didn't get the germ for this lesson from a member of our tribe. Ben gave me this book several weeks ago when I was discussing the song that Deborah sang, and she talks about the stars in their courses when she defeated Sisera. And I referenced the fact that Isaac Asimov, who is a massively published science fiction writer and a well-known atheist, when he wrote a book that used that title. And Ben saw that, and he didn't say anything to me at the time, but he had 2 copies of this at home. And when we met the McNairs, he gave me one of these copies. And so I just decided, since I'm in Judges, I'm going to read through what he wrote. And the source idea from this lesson came from an atheist, of all people. You say, how dare you read what an atheist wrote? Wait a minute now. Here's an atheist who took the time to write a 1,200-page book on the entirety of Scripture. And here's an observation that he makes about the story that we just looked at in Judges 19 through 21. Again, it would seem tribal disunity exacerbated the situation. One cannot help thinking that the Benjamites would not have acted with such disregard of humanity if they had not been dealing with Ephraimites, members of another tribe, and therefore strangers. The irony of it is that if the Ephraimite and his concubine had slept over in Jerusalem, which Judges says is Jebus, the city of a stranger, quote, which, let me start over again. The irony of it is that if the Ephraimite and his concubine had slept over in Jerusalem, the city of a stranger, which he would not enter, he would probably have been safe. Now, I don't know that I would go that far, but I'm saying the principle is you would think amongst your own brethren you would be safe. And this atheist says tribal disunity was their problem. Those are good observations. Now we have to ask ourselves this as Christians abroad. And this is a moment of self-reflection as we conclude this morning. and you think about tribal disunity and tribal politics in the church, and the fact that we can't hardly get anything going because brethren are so busy either bickering with each other or basically just sitting on their laurels because they're happy to let my preacher preach to me, just pooling their ignorance and baptizing 12-year-olds so that we can have more people in the tribe. And what does it get you? Nothing. We're not saying anything bad about kids. We want kids to be good, but we're talking about kids versus committed, valiant men and women. And that's pressure on a child that they can't possibly grasp. They are not Christians. They are safe children. Now, you have to ask yourself this, and I'm saying you think deeply. How is it possible that an atheist is a better Bible student than most Christians? Shameful. I'm not saying you have to be whatever Isaac Asimov's credentials were as a scientist. He was a smart dude. And let me tell you, he hated on religion. He was a secular Jew. I don't know if that was by profession or by birth. And anytime he had the chance, from what little excerpts I read, boy, he was hard on religion. And he still took the time to write 1,200 pages on Scripture, and there's some good stuff in there. How is that possible that an atheist is a better Bible student than most Christians? Is it because most Christians just inherited the tribe? The trouble with tribalism. Let's all stand and sing.
Saved a wretch like me. I want